Thomas Alive Today presents
Frederick and Nelson. Frederick and Nelson was the successor to a business founded by two partners, Donald E. Frederick and James Meekum, who had been mining colleagues in Colorado. They happened to connect shortly after Frederick arrived in Seattle on a steamer in 1890, and they pooled their resources to start a second-hand furniture business. After setting up shop in several locations, the business was named J.G. Meekum and Company. Sometime later, another mining colleague, Nels B. Nelson, arrived also from Colorado. He subsequently purchased a one-third interest in the business. Several months later, due to ill health, Meekum sold his interest to the two remaining partners and the name was changed to Frederick and Nelson. They vowed to create the largest and finest store west of the Mississippi and north of San Francisco. Early customers included the local Native Americans and a thriving populace invigorated by the news that Seattle would become the western terminus for the Great Northern Railway. In 1891, the partners acquired the Queen City Furniture Company and began selling new furniture. Their motto was, "What our customers want, we will give them." Service is our motto. Their sincerity was tested when just before closing time on a snowy Christmas Eve in 1890, a customer came in to purchase a second-hand rocking chair for his wife for Christmas, requiring it to be delivered that night. Frederick and Nelson sloshed through the snow to the top of Denny Hill to deliver the heavy chair, making the first delivery in the history of Frederick and Nelson. Legend has it that their first credit customer was a Native American woman who coveted a second-hand parlor stove. The stove was hers for weekly payments of berries, a woven mat, and a sweetgrass basket. The Klondike Gold Rush around the start of the 20th century fueled further growth of Seattle. There was a growing demand for fine furnishings in the blossoming hotel business as well as in the fine homes of the city's inhabitants. Their simple philosophy was, if a customer asks for it, get it, and if enough people want the same thing, start a department. There were departments for furniture, carpeting, housewares, china, and draperies. They even had a mattress factory. Frederick and Nelson purchased the assets of the Pacific Carpet Company in 1897 and the company was consolidated with Silas Monroe's New England Furniture Store and the name changed again to Frederick, Nelson, and Monroe. Monroe was leery of rapid expansion, and he soon parted company with Frederick and Nelson. In 1907, the ailing Nels Nelson was returning from a trip to a medical spa in Bohemia and died at sea. Frederick was left to run the entire operation. Expansion plans were made in 1914 for a brand new building 6 stories tall with a 7th floor in the basement. Despite a shortage of building materials that were needed elsewhere to fight the First World War, the building opened the day after Labor Day on September 3, 1918, at Pine Street and 5th Avenue. Over 25,000 shoppers and guests made it through the doors that day. Frederick was forward-thinking enough to make the foundation strong enough to hold 10 stories. Even though businessmen and financiers branded the project Frederick's Folly, his dream was finally realized 3 decades later. At the age of 69 in 1929, D.E. Frederick decided to retire, and he sold the store to Marshall Field and Company for $6 million. He was most impressed with the policies of Marshall Field and had even patterned Frederick and Nelson after Marshall Field and Company. They signed a 99-year lease that would pay Frederick and later his estate $100,000 a year. In 1943, Frederick and Nelson opened a satellite store at Boeing Field at the Boeing Airplane Company's No. 2 plant. They supported the war effort and built a loyalty among the airplane manufacturer's 47,000 employees. Fredericks also established a victory post on the main floor of the Seattle store, selling war bonds and stamps. Fredericks was one of a handful of stores in the nation to receive a U.S. Treasury Department T flag. The T flag signified that more than 90% of the employees invested at least 10% of their earnings in war bonds. D.E. Frederick's dreams for expansion of the original store at Pine Street and 5th Avenue finally were realized when the grand reopening was celebrated August 4, 1952. There were 10 floors above ground and 2 below. The building housed a beauty salon, post office, moving picture auditorium, a fully equipped medical facility, and a nursery. There were reading and writing rooms, and the large, elaborately furnished 5th floor tea room could seat 400. On the 10th floor, the company built a modern candy kitchen that could turn out more than 500,000 pounds of Frango chocolates a year. Later, the company added a kindergarten and a children's barber shop. By 1980, Frederick and Nelson had become one of the fastest growing stores in the nation, nearly quadrupling from 4 stores to 15. Marshall Field's acquired 3 Liberty House stores in Portland, and 2 in Tacoma, as well as 6 Lippman stores in Oregon from the Dayton-Hudson Corporation. All were converted to Frederick and Nelson stores. Ownership would change 3 more times in the next 9 years as business went on a downward spiral. Management changes occurred in 1982 when Battis Incorporated of Louisville, Kentucky, bought all of the outstanding stock of Marshall Field and Company. Battis Retail Group now included Marshall Field, Saks Fifth Avenue, Frederick, and Nelson, Gimbels, Kohl's, and a number of other department stores. By the mid-1980s they were beginning to close the Oregon stores. One Oregon location at Washington Square lasted until 1990. Battis sold the money-losing Frederick and Nelson to local investors in September 1986. 2 stores were immediately closed, Portland and Salem, Oregon. Poor management decisions led to an overabundance of lower-priced, out-of-season merchandise and large investments in inventory at the wrong prices. Additionally, the inability to pay bills on time led to late deliveries of critical merchandise and empty-looking stores. No longer known for fashionable, high-end clothing, Frederick and Nelson became unable to withstand competitive pressures, particularly when the Seattle area entered a recession in the late 1980s. Fading rapidly, the chain entered a fatal liquidity crisis and closed for the last time in May 1992. Frango's exact year of creation and the origin of the name have been lost to history. According to a trademark document from the U.S. Patent Office, the name Frango was first officially used on June 1, 1918. A popular item on the tea room menu was a frozen dessert called Frango, and it was available in maple and orange flavors. The name probably originated by the combination of Fran from Frederick and Nelson, and the go from the tango dance craze. In 1926, the consistency of the Frango dessert was described as flaky, requiring the use of a fork, not a spoon, such as one would use with ice cream. Eventually the Frango dessert line included pies, ice cream sodas, and milkshakes. It was decided in 1928 or 1929 that Frederick should offer a chocolate mint truffle. Candy maker Ray Alden is credited with developing the Frango mint. His secret recipe called for chocolate from cocoa beans grown on the African coast and South America, triple distilled oil of Oregon peppermint and 40% butter. A few months after Frederick sold out to Marshall Field in 1929, Frederick's candy makers in Seattle were summoned to Chicago to introduce Frango chocolates to Marshall Field to help build slumping sales during the Great Depression. Soon, the Candy Kitchen at Marshall Field had produced their own Midwestern interpretation of the Frango chocolate recipe. Frango's was produced on the 10th floor of the downtown flagship store.
Frederick and Nelson has always been a big part of Christmas. Everyone loved Frango's, of course, and a gift from Frederick and Nelson. That was special. You'll still find very special gifts at Frederick and Nelson, like beautiful Baccarat crystal, the crystal of kings, all the way from France. It's perfect for someone special. It just wouldn't be Christmas without Frederick.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.